And let's assume that we comp the way we want it. So I just made some bass comp here. What I want to focus now is on the mixing. Now, bless you. The way, as I said, the way the mics were set up, you have 2 mics for the kick, 2 for the snare, 1 for the hi-hat, 1 for the rack tom, 1 for the floor tom, 2 overheads, and stereo room. So when you start mixing the drums, for now, forget about the room mics. Don't use them. We can use them in later, blend them in later. The perspective that which they recorded was audience perspective. Okay, so basically how we were seeing the drums. Okay, that helps you in determining where to pan things, right? Because remember, we have the overheads plus the individual mic. If you misplace the tom, the floor tom, you have it on one side on the overhead, and on the other side panned, it's gonna sound weird. It's gonna sound wrong. Now the drummer was a left-handed drummer, so it adds an extra twist, right? So basically, with the overheads as they are, we pan the overheads left and right, right? Because they're called left and right. So here are the 2 overheads. How far, it's kind of up to you how much you want the drums open, but be a little bit conservative. And then you need to pan things as you were seeing them in the session, right? So, so the snare could be a touch on the left. Again, was a left-handed drummer. The hi-hat is definitely a touch on the left. The rack tom could be centered really, but the floor tom needs to be on the left. Kick it in the center. If you misplace it, it's going to sound very weird because you're going to get some on the overhead on one side and the direct mic on the other side. Use your headphones to place things exactly where they should be. You know, not earpod. If you can, some closed headphones, quiet environment, bring up the overhead, listen to where things are, and then you match that panning with the individual mics, the individual pens. Now, once you have done that, a little bit of organizational thing. Let me just color code these tracks because I like to have them red. Now, first of all, you create a bus for the 2 kicks. Okay, so you send the 2 kicks to a bus, which is going to be called bass drum mix. So go to output, bus. My bus one is going to be this one here. Name it right away, bass drum mix. Why do I want to do that? Because if I want to EQ the full the bass drum as a mix of the 2 mics, I do it there. If I want to compress it, I do it there. If I want to lower it, I do it there rather than individually doing on each mic, unless I want to. For some reason you want to compress more this, absolutely, you do it here. But if I want to, you know, think about my bass drum globally, I'm not gonna mess with these 2. I only use these 2 to find the right balance between the 2 sounds. One is set, then this is gonna be my bass drum. And same thing for the snare. All right, I'm gonna select the 2 snare track, output, bus 2, name it right away, snare drum mix. Do the same for the toms. It's also good to have one for the toms. Again, bus it to bus 3. This is gonna be my toms mix. Do it for the overhead. If you want to EQ the overhead, don't put an EQ here and then an EQ here, because it's gonna be very hard what what you're changing. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to bus it to bus 4, overhead mix. And you can do one for the room as well, even though we're not really using it a lot. But this is going to be my room mix. Room mix. All right. Then you're going to make sure to have a subgroup, submix for all the drums together. Right. So what do I need to send to that mix? My hi-hat. And that's pretty much it. My hi-hat and then those 5 buses. Okay. Actually, the room, I'm going to leave it separately. But right here, now I'm going to select the output, new bus. And this is going to be my drum mix. Does it make sense? Questions? Are you following, or it's like I'm speaking Italian? Ask question if it doesn't make sense, because I'm going to repeat it. So the idea is to have submixes for my bass, kick, snare, toms, overheads, and room mics, right? So I can, because they are stereo, they're not on stereo tracks, they're on 2 mono tracks, so I can easily control them. And then it's nice to have a full bus that has all the drums together. So how do I do that? I'm going to send my submixes here, plus the hi-hat, which was the only one by itself that doesn't have a submix, to my drum mix bus. So this controls my entire drums, and this controls individual sound that are linked together. Okay, so do this before start mixing it, because otherwise it's going to be a mess. You really need to have this ready. Once this is ready, easy. Now it's just fun. You just start, checking out the sounds. Again, assuming that you already comped the best takes. So now, how do we work with this? One mic at a time. I'm going to solo my kick first. This is the kick in, okay? And first thing, blend the two, right? See, each one gives you a very different sound, right? So this is definitely more pointy, right? It has more attack. This one, it gives you the fullness, right? Now, which balance you want, it's totally up to you. Do I want something, more pointy and less full, right? I personally like something a little bit fuller with a nice edge, though, because if I take this, I'm losing a little bit of the edginess of the kick, right? Let's say, okay, that sounds pretty good, all right? Good start. Now remember, the kick mixed come here. So now is where I would gate the kick, right? Because see, I'm hearing a lot of like other things spilling into the kick mics, right? Is the snare, mainly the snare. There's not a lot of other things going on, right? So it would be nice to have the kick just clean by itself. So how do I clean it? Well, I could go crazy and edit each transient manually, which we're not going to do because it's insane. Instead, we can insert on the bass drum mix a noise gate, right? So who can tell me what the noise gate is? Anybody? go through. Right. It's kind of like, you know, you having the hand on the mute button for that channel, and every time the signal is not strong enough, you mute it. Right? But you go crazy, muting, I'm muting, muting, I'm muting, muting, I'm muting. So with the noise gate, basically you set a threshold. When the signal is below the threshold, the channel is closed. Right? When the signal is strong enough and goes above the threshold, the channel is open. You can use the logic one. It's under dynamics, and there is one that's called noise gate. Because I'm using a stereo bus, I'm going to use a stereo one. And it's pretty self-explanatory because you can see when the channel is closed or open. And basically, you want to have the channel open only when the kick plays, not when the snare plays, right? The ghost signal from the snare that bleeds into the microphone plays. So I can see here, see, it's kind of open and closing. If I bring the threshold higher, it's going to open only for transients, only for signal that is very loud. Right? You have to be careful not to chop it too much like this. Right? If you go too high, you're going to lose a lot of notes, a lot of transients. If you go too low, you're going to hear the snare again. Now, this works well for like this part, for example, where it's very defined. If there are a lot of ghost notes, that's the noise gate is not a good idea. But if there are things that are very pop, you know, very clear when they are being played, this is a good system. And again, there are things that are going to also still being heard, but the kick is cleaner now, right? Now I'm going to do the same for the snare. Right? So now let's again hear the two mics, right? So this is the top mic that gives you kind of like, again, the body, right? And the bottom mic gives you the spring. Right? So you need to kind of create a balance that you like. You know, maybe like a mixture of top and bottom. If you want the snare to be woodier, you have less bottom. Right? If you want it snappier, you have a little more of the bottom of the snare. So let's say, okay, this is pretty cool. I like it. Now we're gonna insert on my snare drum mix another gate. I'm just gonna copy this one as a starting point, right? And let's listen. Right, I want to get rid of the kick. Okay, that's pretty cool. Kind of cleaning it up. The release and hold are to make sure that you keep the sustain of the signal you're gating, right? So if I have a little more release, it's going to take a little bit longer to close the channel. Right? Because otherwise I'm losing a little bit of the body of the signal, right? Now, once you have gated the snare, and again, this really depends on the style. If it was a jazz thing, I wouldn't gate them. If in your piece there are a lot of ghost notes, you might not want to gate it. This is for pieces that are really kind of clear. You know, the hits of the kick and the snare are really clear, easily recognizable by the noise gate engine. Once you've done that, bring back the kick. And now let's listen to the two together. And again, it might sound a little bit kind of sterile, right? But remember that we have to bring in the other mics, right? But it's definitely cleaner than this, right? I don't care about the hi-hat because I have a mic for the hi-hat, right? Now, let's solo the hi-hat. Now for the hi-hat, we cannot gate it because the transients are not strong enough. You can only gate bass, snare, and toms, nothing else. But on the hi-hat, again, the goal is to clean up each mic as much as possible so that when we mix it, we have full control over the sound of each individual piece of the kit. So on the hi-hat, what do you think we can do to avoid the bleeding from other instruments of the kit? Yeah, we can definitely work with EQ, right? And just add a high pass filter, because again, in the hi-hat, I don't really care about low frequencies. I mean, I really care about the frequencies of the hi-hat, which are definitely, above the kick and sort of above this of the snare. So this is my hi-hat without the EQ. So the kick is kind of like gone. Now be careful not to overdo it. Okay? That's kind of too much. But now the kick is kind of gone from the hi-hat mic, right? Again, at this point, bring back all the other ones that you already worked on. Right? And again, each one that you add, each mic that you add is going to alter a little bit the previous one. So that's why you have to do it, solo this, work on it, solo the next one, work on it, bring back the previous one, right? Because now that I hear it like this with the hi-hat, well, it's okay. I wouldn't mind the snare maybe to be a little bit snappier, maybe, so I can bring this down a little bit. Right? Now, for the tom, at this point, before bringing the toms in, bring in the overhead. Now, for the overhead, same thing. What do we really care about the overhead? What are the frequencies and instruments or pieces of the kit that we care about for the overhead? Yeah, cymbals, right? If there are sometimes you might a drum kit without having a mic for the toms, and so the toms are also part of the overhead signal. That makes it a little bit trickier. But since we have individual mics for the tom, we really don't care about low frequencies in the overhead, right? And see, this is why we bus them, because I don't want to insert an EQ here and EQ here because it's going to be very hard. Excuse me, drink some. It's going to be very hard to understand what we are EQing if we EQ just one channel. Instead, I'm just going to EQ my overhead mix right here. I'm going to bring up my high pass filter. There are not a lot of cymbals in your part, I think. But yeah, I remember going through it. All right, here, there's some there. Right, so that's kind of. Right, so you don't want to overdo it, otherwise you're gonna miss too much. Right, this is the overhead. With and without high pass filter. Now, let's bring back everything we've added so far. Right? So we just clean it that way. The final thing that we need to clean are the toms. Again, there's not a lot of tom activity here. There's a floor tom here somewhere, so we can just look. Oh, maybe there's something here. And so for that, I'm gonna just solo my toms, right? Right. And again, because I have a tom mix, I can gate that mix. Again, because there's not a lot of tom activity, I'm pretty good. Yeah, it's gonna be a little, you know, toms are a little bit trickier to gate. Just it's good enough. All right, so now we have the entire kit ready to go. At this point, create a sort of balance, right, between the kit. So maybe the height is too loud. Now, unfortunately, the height is going to be a little bit everywhere, including the overhead. So there's only so much you can do. But the snare can come down a little bit. Now, just to so that you can hear what the room mics do, right? So I'm just gonna bring them up here. So they had a little bit more of a dimension to the mix. Oh, so it's the bass, sorry. My mistake. All right, these are the room mics. Just gonna bring them in. Right, so these are just room mics. Right, so use them very, very sparsely. Right, you can just kind of bring them in a little bit if you want. And then remember that this is my full, I'm gonna mute them for now. This is my full drum mix. And we need a full drum mix because eventually we want to compress a little bit the full kick, the full mix, the full drums. So once you cleaned it up and made a kind of like a first pass at the balancing the signal. So I'm gonna, the floor tom is too loud. I'm gonna just lower it. Now is thinking more about the sound that you want in terms of EQ and compression, right? So at this stage, if you cleaned it up nicely, I would just keep the full mix going while you work on individual pieces of the kit, because it just gives you a better view of the overall mix that you're gonna get. Right, so let's look at the kick. Again, at this point, I'm gonna work with my kick mix. So we might want to compress it a little bit. When you compress it, you have different options in terms of, do you want a more like a vintage compressor, or you want something, you know, a little more modern. The compressors in Logic are not terrible, they're okay. So you can start with that. If you have you all have the Waves. Do you have all the Waves Gold, I think? Yeah, I would probably gravitate towards those better. But if you want to use the Logic ones, how do you work the compressor? In fact, let me just solo the kick so we can hear it. First of all, choose the ratio. Okay. So you choose the threshold. That's where the compressor starts kicking in. If you have a very high threshold, nothing gets compressed. You can even look at it with the graph. This actually is interesting, is nice. These are my kick hits. See, there's no compression because the threshold is way up here. If I lower the threshold, see the compressor starts kicking in. And how much the signal is compressed or lowered is determined by the ratio. So if I do this, it's a lot of compression. See, you can see it graphically there. If I do this, there's very little compression, just a touch. Now, more compression means that all the hits are going to be more equally in terms of volume dynamics. Less compression means that you just keep the natural dynamic that the drummer was playing with. Again, it's kind of up to you. Don't overdo it. When you compress something with a sharp attack, like a kick or a snare, the attack should be not very short. It's counterintuitive, but you want to have a longer attack so that the transient of the hit gets not compressed, and then you compress the rest. You have to kind of listen to it and balance it a little bit. Finally, you can have the makeup gain. Because we are compressing the signal, which means lowering it a little bit, you use the makeup gain to regain what you're losing. So you can bring it up a touch. Don't use the auto gain ever. Okay. And always compare it. That's what we had. Okay, so you gain a little bit in. Unfortunately, the auto gain is always on automatically. So always compare it. What am I getting? Again, this part is very even. So I don't think we need a lot of compression here. Right? It's a little bit. You can also experiment with like more vintage compressors. They just give a different color. Okay. Now, if I was gonna choose a compressor for this kick more than this one, I would probably use something like or something like that. It's a more aggressive, it's a more color, but again, it's up to you. The one in Logic are totally fine. Now I would do the same for the snare, right? So I'm gonna. Oh, and by the way, you can also work the EQ, right? So on the kick, if you feel like, maybe this kick can have a little bit more low end, I'm missing a little bit of the low end here, you can just, right? So that gives you a little bit more of a low endish sound. And now you move on to the snare. And again, let's pick a Logic compressor. Especially the snare compressor is actually a good idea. Yeah, not a big fan of these compressors in Logic. Let's pick a different one. Let's pick maybe one from Waves. That's okay. you know, it's a classic one, right? But kind of same parameters, right? So you have your threshold here, right? And then you have your amount of compression. One longer attack. And then you use your output gain to regain a little bit the loss. And then again, bring back the kick. I'm going to readjust the volume a little bit. Right, so just build it up that way, and you would do the same for the floor, for the toms, right? Toms, compression on toms is actually a good thing. Don't compress the overhead, don't compress the hi-hat. We're going to compress the full kit in a second. The next thing is to give the right ambience. That's one thing that you have to be careful, because you don't want to overdo it for drums. Of course, here we would have also the other tracks, so we would judge that. But let's assume that we just focus on the drums. There are a couple of reverb that I think I recommend having. One for snares, toms, well, one for the full kit, and then something more specific for snares and toms. For the full kit, we're just gonna use sand here, right? And I'm just gonna pick, well, actually, let's do it like this. So I'm gonna have it for the hi-hat, I'm gonna have it for my bass drum, snare drum, toms, and overhead. For the room, no, we leave that alone. So I'm just gonna add a new bus, and I'm gonna add a reverb, and this one we call it reverb drums, right? Now, which type of reverb? It's kind of up to you. If you want a more acoustic type of sound, I highly recommend using the Space Designer. Space Designer is a convolution reverb, right? This has spaces, the real spaces, churches, studios, rooms, they were sampled. And so the response is a real natural response. I usually like to use especially for an acoustic setting, to use a convolution reverb, because it's not artificial. It's like a real space, and makes things, my opinion, makes mixing things easier. Everything is, I think, more clean. If not, you can use an algorithm reverb. You can hear the difference in a second. But what matters is the size and the type of room that you're going to use. So when I go to the presets here, first thing you can choose between large spaces and medium spaces. And then in each of those, you have rooms, halls, and a bunch of other things. I wouldn't choose room unless you want to create a special kind of effect. I would most likely choose either like indoor spaces or halls. So for this, in this case, I would gonna choose a medium space, and maybe I'm gonna choose an indoor space. In terms of length, I wouldn't go more. I would stay between 1.6 and 1.8 seconds for drums to start with. So I'm gonna choose, say, a keyhole, see how it sounds. I'm gonna bring up the wet, right? And always have a touch of pre-delay. That's not too long, because otherwise it's gonna create a like funny effect. But touch of pre-delay, and always on the reverb, put a high pass filter that clears up the reverb a little bit. And now I'm going to start just using the sand to bring up a little bit of room in it, right? For the kick, use very little. A touch is nice. always check how long the reverb is. Just stop the track and listen to the tail, because sometimes, you know, if the tail is too long, think that is gonna just add a lot of muddiness to the mix, right? Now, again, when we're gonna bring more tracks in it, we probably are gonna add more reverb. But for now, if this was the track that we're mixing, this places the kit in, you know, a little bit of a space, right? Now, if you want, you can use not a convolutional reverb. You can use an algorithmic reverb, like, for example, Chromaverb. But bottom line is that when you choose your spaces in a nice way, don't go to rooms. Unfortunately, here it doesn't tell you the length of each one. You can change it later, but you know, this goes more like in terms of you know, type of reverb. So you can say, let's say, a dance to let's try vocal room. Now this is very short. Right, so this kind of works. That's the room where the drums will be in. Right, so this works too. Now, the other thing is that you can add some, so you get one reverb for just to place the whole kit somewhere, like in a space. And then you're gonna do, you can use another reverb to create something, to give a little bit of character to some of the pieces, right? So for example, on the snare, I think I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but I can add a second send and use maybe a gated reverb, very sparsely, but that gives a little bit of character to snares and toms. So if I go to reverb, I'm going to use a reverb called N-verb, which stands for envelope reverb. And this one basically is called a gated reverb because it allows me to act as a reverb, but then the tail doesn't die out. It just dies very abruptly. So if on my snare, I'm going to overdo it so you can hear it. I put some gated reverb. You hear that extra space, right? So that might be too much, but just a touch. And you can send this also to my main reverb so that also the gated part gets affected by the main reverb. Right, so it just gets a little bit of character. On toms also is nice to do. It's a nice, nice touch. The other thing that you can do, if your drums is lacking a little bit of punch, you can use a transient manager or transient shaper to add a little bit of attack to whatever piece of the kit you need. So for example, on the kick here, if I want to have a kick a little bit like punchier, I can open up my audio units, native instruments, and there's one called transient master here, and this allows me to add more attack to that signal. Right, just adds a little bit more attack. We're gonna lower the gain a little bit. So it's something that sometimes is nice, especially if the drummer was playing too soft. You can kind of recreate the same feeling if the drummer was playing harder with the transient master. enhances the attack portion of the signal. I like to use it often. I mean, on this particular drum, probably not, but if you have parts that need a little bit more of punch, use it. It's a cool one. Waves has some hipper ones, but this works pretty well actually. The final thing is to compress the full mix of the drums. So remember that's why we created a drum mix here. And for that, you need to use the right compressor. Unfortunately, the ones that are in Logic, there is a bus compressor in Logic, I believe, but it's not ideal. Let me see. I like better to have just a compressor that is really for buses, which means it can handle more complex waveforms. So one that I really like is the SSL bus compressor. It was on sale a few days ago. It's a native bus compressor, right? This gives also a little bit of a vintage type of sound. And so the way it sounds with the full mix, the full drum mix compressed, it's kind of just keep it a little more together. Shouldn't be anything that you hear it a lot like this, right? That's too much. You can take the life out of it. By compressing the full bass, the full drum bass, helps mixing it nicely with the other tracks, so things don't just jump out and stick out. All right. The final thing is to bring in the bass, and the balance between the bass and the drum, especially the bass and the kick, that's an important one. So I'm gonna solo the bass, and we're just gonna listen to the bass first. I mean, this bass sound doesn't need a lot, it's deep, there's a good attack. Tacho compressor. Right, so you have a nice kind of like presence. Oh, I hate this. Have a nice release, like a nice sustained sound. It's a little bit hard to EQ it standing here, and especially in this room, but maybe I would take some resonances out a little bit. So you keep the low end and maybe add a touch of punch, a touch of definition. And then you have to check it with the drums, especially with the kick. See, when I bring in the drums, now the bass's frequency is really kind of changed. So make sure that the kick and the bass form like a really solid thing together, right? To help that, what you can do is to compress the bass with a side chain of the kick, right? So at the moment, the way I'm compressing the bass is just by itself. But what I can do is to say, compress the bass when you get a signal from one of the channels. And the channel that I want to use to have the compressor kick in for the bass is our bass one with the 2 kicks, right? So this means that when the kick hits, the bass gets compressed a touch. Right? So you get the kick, you hear nicely the kick, the punch of the kick, and then the bass comes in. See the gel a little bit better? Right? It almost feels like it's one instrument, sort of. I mean, they're 2 different, but right? Because now the bass is compressed when the kick comes in. So you hear the punch of the kick and then the bass. Right? Questions? I know, it's a lot. We basically compressed half of a semester of mixing concept in an hour and a half. But those things, you just need to hear them many times. It's not something that you just go, oh yeah, I get it. It's like just hear them from different teachers, from different projects, and you just keep doing them more and more, and then all this starts making sense. Especially the compressor. That's the hardest thing to do. It's not something easy to. You just need just more time using it. Okay, but again, I believe I recorded all this. Just double check. I think I did. Yeah. So all this is recorded in the class recording. So if you just go back to your session and follow along with what I did, you're already in a good shape.